All right, YouTube, Occult Literature video number 49, the Aphorisms of Urbigerus, Barrow Urbigerus, that is, which may be a pseudonym for Baron Urbigerus. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, second link to my books blog with many other works available. This work stands at 32 pages, so a relatively short tract, but considerable within the alchemical tradition. What it comprises is 100 different aphorisms. Specifically, they're about a sentence or two sentences long for the most part. Some are up towards a paragraph in length. And what they deal with is the alchemical process, repeatedly reminding the reader, of course, things have to be done properly. If you're going to create elixir, if you're going to do any of these miraculous things, these steps have to be followed. The idea, and this is from the English tradition, as opposed to many of these works are in Latin, some are in like French or whatever. This is actually in English, a British work, which is fairly interesting. There is the veiling of the alchemical recipes being spoken of here with the usual suspects, the green dragon, the red lion, here's your red tincturing oil, and so forth. That being said, it's one of the more detailed alchemical works while being one of the more difficult to read. It's similar to the Rosary of the Philosophers in the sense of the veiling of the actual meaning in order to prevent people who are not meant to practice alchemy from actually being capable of doing so. Of course, many people in the alchemical tradition, and this is warned against not just by Barrow, but other authors as well from the time period. Many of them attempted to extract these materials from animal tissue, from vegetative remains and things of that nature. Now, depending on the specific alchemical practice that can be done, for instance, vegetative remains being composted, having water run through it, humidifying the dead earth, or the feces as it would be termed, will give rise to a great amount of nitrate which will leach out of the soil. This is your foliated earth. This is then, of course, processed. What you're talking about is saltpeter. If you're talking about more the Hollandaise side, you're talking about using lead and antimony and some of these things. If you're talking about some of the others, you're talking about attempting to project a metal by creating a colloidal substance, sort of the aurum potabile or something like that. The elixir, there are different sort of recipes, different sorts of ways of making it. There's the philosopher's stone, which depending upon the author that you're consulting, it could be the result of quicksilver being processed, or gold being processed, or rudimentary saltpeter again, or other substances being mixed or distilled in such a manner that something approximating the look and feel of a precious metal is created. Of course, some were counterfeiters, some alchemists at the time. This is not a counterfeiting work. This is more of the medicinal side. Some were simply trying to create an alloy that would look like gold or silver while being relatively cheap to make, and then they'd make fake currency with it, pass it off as the real stuff. And of course, you could get wealthy doing that sort of thing back in the day. I mean, the metallurgy, unless you consulted somebody who was fairly knowledgeable about such a thing, the average governor, the average lord, they didn't know. If it looked like gold, if it looked like silver, and acted like, okay, well, we'll accept it as currency. There's really not a whole lot they could do about it. But Barrow Urbigerus' work here is a series of 100 aphorisms. It is veiled language. It does have the green dragon sort of stuff. But if you can literally just use a Google search and you can find out the specific substances that are actually being spoken of. I chose to leave it in its veiled language because I'm also a bibliophile. I'm interested in keeping the manuscript intact and original. I'm not going to go through line by line and annotate every use of these terms. It just wouldn't make sense. Very interesting work. It also refers to alchemy as a hermetic science, as opposed to sophistry or one of these other terms that would be used, or divine philosophy. There are various things that they use to refer to themselves as. But Barrow Urbigerus' work is detailed while being veiled, but it's an invaluable part of any alchemical library. It's quite interesting, actually, to read, if you can work your way through the rather thickly veiled language, let's face it. So, as always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, a second link as well to my books blog where many other alchemical works are available. That's about all. Peace out.